Little girl shows her fridge to a man, not knowing he's a millionaire. Her life changed forever. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe and comment the word Amen to receive some great news, and tell us where you're watching from. Share it with someone who could use a dose of hope today. The autumn rain drummed against the thin windows of the small house on Maple Street, each drop echoing the emptiness that had settled into every corner of 7-year-old Sophie's world. She pressed her tiny face against the cold glass, watching other children run home to warm dinners and full refrigerators, while behind her the silence of their empty kitchen spoke volumes about their desperate situation. "Mummy, when is dinner ready?" Sophie asked, turning toward the living room where her mother Rachel lay curled on the worn couch, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Rachel's once vibrant brown hair now hung limp around her pale face, and the dark circles under her eyes had deepened over the past 6 months, since the cancer diagnosis had stolen her strength and their financial stability. Rachel forced a weak smile, the kind that mothers perfect when they're trying to shield their children from the harsh realities of life. "In a little while, sweetheart. Why don't you play with your dolls for now?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, each word requiring energy she no longer possessed. Sophie nodded obediently, but instead of reaching for her toys, she wandered into the kitchen and stood before the refrigerator. The ancient appliance hummed loudly, working overtime to keep cool the few items inside: a half-empty carton of milk that would expire tomorrow, 2 slices of bread growing stale, and a jar of peanut butter with maybe 1 sandwich worth left. The 7-year-old understood more than her mother realized. She knew that the phone calls that made Mommy cry were from people asking for money. She knew that the envelopes marked "Final Notice" weren't birthday invitations. She knew that when Mommy said, "We'll have a big dinner tomorrow," it usually meant they'd have crackers and water tonight. Rachel closed her eyes, fighting back tears as she listened to Sophie's footsteps in the kitchen. 3 months ago, she'd made the hardest decision of her life. After years of silence, years of protecting a secret that had become too heavy to bear alone, she'd written a letter. A letter to the one person who could save them, the man who didn't even know he had a daughter. David Bennett had been a whirlwind romance during Rachel's waitressing days at the upscale downtown restaurant. He was charming, successful, and everything seemed perfect during their brief 2-month relationship. But when his business expansion required him to move across the country, they'd both agreed it was best to end things. Rachel discovered she was pregnant a week after he left, but pride and fear kept her from reaching out. She'd convinced herself she could handle motherhood alone. Now lying on the couch with her body betraying her and their savings account showing 23.47, that pride seemed foolish. The letter sat in the mailbox on Monday morning, addressed to David Bennett, CEO of Bennett Construction Empire, with a return address that would either save them or destroy the last piece of her dignity. "Mommy?" Sophie's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Should I save the milk for tomorrow?" Rachel's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her 7-year-old daughter was already learning to ration food, already sacrificing her today for an uncertain tomorrow. She struggled to sit up, every movement sending waves of exhaustion through her weakened body. "No, baby, drink the milk if you want it." The truth was, Rachel didn't know if there would be groceries tomorrow. She didn't know if there would be a tomorrow in this house at all. The eviction notice tucked beneath a stack of medical bills gave them until the end of the month. 12 days to find a miracle. 12 days for David Bennett to receive her letter and decide whether a daughter he'd never met was worth saving. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on their small sanctuary, and somewhere across town, a letter with their fate sealed inside sat in a pile of corporate mail, waiting to change everything. David Bennett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the same autumn rain that drummed against Sophie's window paint intricate patterns down the glass. At 36, he commanded a construction empire worth over $50 million, yet the stack of mail on his mahogany desk felt heavier than any skyscraper foundation he'd ever engineered. His assistant, Margaret, had sorted through the usual corporate correspondence, contract proposals, investment opportunities, charity requests that all blurred together in their professional politeness. But one envelope stood out, handwritten in careful cursive, with a return address from a part of the city he rarely visited anymore. David picked up the letter with hands that had built fortunes, but trembled slightly as he recognized the name in the corner, Rachel Martinez. 8 years melted away in an instant, bringing back memories of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and a love that had burned bright and brief like a shooting star. "Rachel," he whispered to the empty office, remembering the waitress with the infectious laugh who had seen past his wealth to the man underneath. She'd been the only woman who'd ever made him consider staying in one place, building something more meaningful than profit margins and quarterly reports. He opened the envelope carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate at his touch. Rachel's handwriting was shakier now, but her words cut through him like precision blades. "Dear David, I know I have no right to contact you after all these years, and I swear on everything I hold dear that I wouldn't if I had any other choice. I'm writing to tell you about Sophie. She's 7 years old. She has your green eyes and your stubborn streak, and she's the most beautiful thing I've ever created. I never told you because I was young and scared and prideful, and I convinced myself I could give her everything she needed alone. I was wrong. I'm dying, David. Cancer. The medical bills have taken everything, and we're going to lose our home. I'm not asking you to love her or even acknowledge her, but if you have any compassion left for the woman I used to be, please help her. She deserves a chance at the life I can't give her anymore. Sophie doesn't know about you. She thinks her father died when she was 2. Maybe that's easier for everyone, but I needed you to know she exists, that there's something beautiful that came from what we shared. She's at 247 Maple Street if you want to see for yourself. I understand if you don't. Rachel." David read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. A daughter. His daughter. 7 years old with his green eyes, living in poverty while he owned more houses than he could count. The guilt hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by something else. A desperate need to see her, to know if she really carried pieces of him in her smile. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, ignoring Margaret's surprise calls about his afternoon meetings. The drive to Maple Street took 45 minutes through traffic. 45 minutes for his mind to race through every possible scenario. What if Rachel was lying? What if the child wasn't his? What if she was, and he'd missed 7 years of her life because of pride and geography? The neighborhood was a stark contrast to his penthouse world. Small houses lined modest streets where children's bicycles lay scattered in yards, and the American dream lived in more humble packages. He parked across from 247 Maple Street and studied the small blue house with its peeling paint and sagging porch. A plan formed in his mind. He couldn't just knock on the door and announce himself. Not yet. He needed to see her first, to understand the situation, to know if Rachel's desperation had colored the truth. David pulled out his phone and called his maintenance supervisor. "Hey, Tom, I need you to create a work order for 247 Maple Street. Water leak, emergency repair needed, and Tom, I'm handling this one personally." 20 minutes later, David Bennett, billionaire CEO, stood on Rachel's front porch wearing borrowed work clothes and carrying a toolbox he barely knew how to use. His heart hammered as he knocked on the door, knowing that whatever happened next would change the course of 3 lives forever. The door opened slowly, revealing a pale woman with tired eyes who looked like a ghost of the vibrant Rachel he'd once known. Behind her, barely visible in the dim hallway, stood a small figure with unmistakably familiar green eyes. Ms. Martinez, I'm here about the water leak. Rachel's hand trembled on the doorknob as she stared at the man who had haunted her dreams for 8 years. David looked older, more distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair, but those green eyes remained exactly as she remembered. The work clothes and toolbox seemed absurd on him, like watching a king pretend to be a peasant, but she understood immediately why he was here. I didn't call about a water leak, she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder where Sophie was colouring at the kitchen table, completely unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The city received a report. Mind if I check your pipes? Sometimes small leaks can cause big problems if they're not caught early. His voice was steady, professional, but Rachel caught the slight tremor that betrayed his emotions. Sophie looked up from her colouring book, her green eyes, so perfectly mirroring David's, filled with curious innocence. "Mommy, who's the fix-it man?" "Just someone here to help, sweetheart," Rachel managed, stepping aside to let David enter. The small living space felt even more cramped with his presence filling it, and she was acutely aware of every shabby detail. The duct tape holding the couch cushions together, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the general air of barely controlled desperation. David set down his toolbox with the careful movements of someone trying not to startle a wild animal. His eyes swept the room, taking in the evidence of their struggles, before settling on Sophie. The resemblance was unmistakable. Not just the eyes, but the stubborn set of her chin, the way she tilted her head when concentrating. "Hi there," he said softly, crouching down to Sophie's level. "What are you colouring?" Sophie held up her picture proudly, a house with a large family standing in front, everyone holding hands under a rainbow. "It's my dream house," she announced with the pure honesty of childhood. "See? There's me and Mommy, and that's my daddy who went to heaven, and my grandparents I never met, and a dog named Patches." David's breath caught in his throat. Rachel had told their daughter he was dead. Of course she had. It was cleaner, easier to explain than abandonment, but hearing it from Sophie's innocent lips felt like a physical wound. "That's beautiful," he managed. "Do you like to draw?" "I love it. Mommy says I'm very good. She used to draw too before she got tired all the time." Sophie's expression grew serious beyond her years. "Are you here because our sink makes funny noises?" "Something like that," David replied, struggling to maintain his composure. Every instinct screamed at him to sweep this child into his arms, to tell her who he was, to make every promise a father should make. Instead, he forced himself to stand and address Rachel. "Could you show me where the problem might be?" Rachel led him toward the kitchen, Sophie trailing behind with her colouring book. The space was tidy despite its obvious limitations, and David noted how Rachel had tried to make it cheerful with handmade decorations and Sophie's artwork covering the refrigerator door. "The sink does make noise sometimes," Rachel admitted quietly. "But David, we need to talk about—" "Later," he interrupted gently, his eyes indicating Sophie's presence. "Let me just take a look at your plumbing first." Sophie perched on a kitchen chair, swinging her legs as she watched David pretend to examine the pipes under the sink. "Are you married, Mr. Fix-It?" "No, I'm not," David answered honestly. "Do you have any kids?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. David's eyes met Rachel's over Sophie's head, and he saw years of regret and desperation reflected there. "I'm not sure," he said finally, "but I hope to someday." Sophie nodded sagely. "Kids are the best. Mommy says I'm her greatest treasure, more valuable than all the money in the world." She paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "But sometimes I wish we had just a little bit of money, so Mommy wouldn't cry when she thinks I'm sleeping." Rachel's face crumpled, and she turned quickly toward the window to hide her tears. David felt something fundamental crack inside his chest. This beautiful, perceptive child was worried about money at 7 years old, trying to comfort a dying mother while living in poverty that he could eliminate with a single phone call. "Sophie," he said carefully, "would you like to show me what's in your refrigerator? Sometimes leaks can affect the whole kitchen." Sophie brightened immediately, hopping down from her chair. "Sure, but there's not much to see." She skipped over to the refrigerator and pulled it open with theatrical flourish, revealing the heartbreakingly sparse contents. What happened next would change everything. Sophie stood before the open refrigerator like a tiny museum tour guide, completely oblivious to the devastating picture she was presenting. The harsh interior light illuminated almost empty shelves. The aging milk, the lonely bread slices, the nearly empty peanut butter jar standing like sentinels in a barren landscape. "See?" Sophie said cheerfully, gesturing with the pride of someone showing off a prized collection. "We have milk, but just a little bit, and some bread for tomorrow's breakfast, and this peanut butter that makes the best sandwiches in the whole world." David's throat constricted as he watched his daughter catalogue their meager supplies with such innocent optimism. Behind him, he could hear Rachel's shaky breathing, her quiet struggle not to break down completely. "And this," Sophie continued, reaching toward the back of the refrigerator where a single apple sat alone on the bottom shelf. "This is my special apple. Mommy bought it just for me 3 days ago, but I'm saving it for when she feels better. She says apples have special powers to make sick people stronger." The apple was beginning to wrinkle, clearly past its prime, but Sophie handled it like a precious jewel. David felt something shatter inside his chest, not just his heart, but every assumption he'd ever made about responsibility, about the luxury of choice, about what really mattered in life. "That's very thoughtful of you," David managed, his voice rougher than intended. "Your mommy is lucky to have such a caring daughter." Sophie beamed at the compliment, then gently returned the apple to its place of honor. "Mommy always says we don't need a lot of food to be happy. She says as long as we have each other, we have everything that matters." She closed the refrigerator door with care, as if protecting precious secrets. "But," she added, with the devastating honesty of childhood, "sometimes my tummy makes noises at night, and I pretend it's just talking to me, so Mommy doesn't worry. She worries about everything now." David had to turn away, his hands gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles went white. In his world, people spent more on a single lunch than this family had for groceries. He'd attended charity galas where the flowers alone could have fed them for months. Yet here stood his daughter, offering profound wisdom about gratitude while her stomach growled. Rachel appeared beside him, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Sophie, sweetheart, why don't you go get your favorite book? Maybe maybe our visitor would like to see it." "David," he said quietly, "my name is David." Sophie's eyes lit up. "That's a nice name. My mommy has a friend named David from a long time ago. She says he was very kind, but had to go far away for his work." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Rachel's face had gone completely pale, while David struggled with the overwhelming urge to tell this child the truth, right here, right now. "I'll get my book," Sophie announced, skipping toward her bedroom with the boundless energy that only children can maintain even in the face of adversity. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, Rachel collapsed against the kitchen counter. "Oh God, David, you see it now, don't you? You see what I was too proud to tell you 8 years ago." David turned to face her, and she was shocked by the raw emotion in his eyes. "She's mine. Yes. She's been living like this while I've been building hotels and buying cars I never drive. I never wanted your money, David. I couldn't watch her suffer anymore. The doctor says I have maybe 3 months, and Sophie doesn't understand why Mommy can't play anymore, why we can't go to the grocery store like other families." 3 months? The words hit him like a physical blow. The cancer spread faster than they expected. I've been trying to find her a good family, someone who could adopt her when I'm gone. But the agencies, they want stability, references, financial security, things I can't provide. David stared at this woman who had carried his child in silence, who had raised their daughter with love and dignity, despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait until now? Rachel's laugh was bitter and exhausted. Because I was young and stupid and convinced myself you'd think I was trying to trap you. Because by the time I realized I needed help, you were already successful, and I was just this. She gestured at herself, at their modest surroundings. Just what? A woman raising my daughter, the best mother she could have asked for? Before Rachel could respond, Sophie's voice echoed from the bedroom. I found it. This is my very favorite book. David wiped his eyes quickly, straightening his shoulders. When Sophie bounded back into the kitchen, clutching a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, he managed to smile. That's a wonderful book, he said. What's your favorite part? Sophie's expression grew serious. I like how Charlotte never gives up on Wilbur, even when things look really bad. Mommy says that's what love is. Never giving up on people, even when it's hard. She looked between David and her mother with innocent perception that seemed far too advanced for her 7 years. Are you going to help fix our water so Mommy doesn't have to worry about one more thing? David knelt down to Sophie's level, looking directly into those green eyes that mirrored his own. Yes, sweetheart, I'm going to fix a lot more than just the water. The next morning brought an unusual flurry of activity to 247 Maple Street. David had left the previous evening with promises to return to finish the job, but what Sophie and Rachel didn't expect was the convoy of trucks that began arriving at 8 a.m. sharp. Sophie pressed her face against the living room window, watching wide-eyed as workers unloaded tools and materials. Mommy! The fix-it man brought friends. Lots of friends. Rachel struggled to sit up on the couch, her energy depleted from yesterday's emotional turmoil. She'd barely slept, replaying every moment of David's visit, analyzing every expression, every word. The way he'd looked at Sophie. There was no question he believed her, but belief and acceptance were two different things entirely. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see David standing on the porch, but he looked different today. Gone were the borrowed work clothes, replaced by an expensive but casual outfit that spoke of wealth without screaming it. He carried a large bag from what appeared to be a high-end grocery store. "Good morning," he said when Rachel opened the door. His eyes immediately found Sophie, who was peering around her mother's legs with curiosity. "Mr. David," Sophie exclaimed, "you came back, and you brought so many helper friends." "I did," David agreed, crouching down to her level. "I also brought something else." He held up the grocery bag. "I thought maybe we could have breakfast together while my team works on those pipes." Sophie's eyes went wide. Real breakfast, with food that isn't just bread. The innocent question hit David like a punch to the gut, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "The realest breakfast you can imagine. And pancakes, bacon, eggs, orange juice, fresh fruit, everything a growing girl needs." Rachel watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and terror. David was moving fast, too fast. Yesterday he'd been a stranger pretending to fix their sink. Today he was bringing groceries and promising breakfasts like he belonged here. "Rachel," David said softly, "could we talk while Sophie helps me unpack these groceries?" She nodded reluctantly, following him into the kitchen where Sophie had already begun investigating the mysterious bag. Her daughter's gasp of delight as she discovered item after item made Rachel's heart clench with both joy and shame. "Look, Mommy. Real strawberries and bananas, and this orange juice isn't the powder kind." Sophie held up each treasure like she'd discovered buried gold. David began removing items with practiced efficiency. Premium bacon, farm-fresh eggs, organic flour for pancakes, real maple syrup, fresh bread that still smelled like the bakery. The counter, which had been bare yesterday, now looked like a feast fit for kings. "I need to ask you something important," David said quietly to Rachel, while Sophie continued exploring. "Last night, after I left here, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About you. About the 8 years I missed. David, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've spent most of my adult life building things, buildings, companies, wealth, but I've never built anything that mattered as much as what you've built here. Sophie is. She's extraordinary." Rachel felt tears threatening again. "She is. But she's also 7 years old and doesn't understand why her world keeps shifting. Yesterday, she thought her father was dead. Today, a stranger is buying her groceries. What happens tomorrow when you decide this is too complicated?" David was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophie arrange the fruit in a careful pattern on the counter. "I want to take a DNA test," he said finally. "Not because I doubt you, but because I need legal documentation if I'm going to help her properly." "Help her how?" "Every way she needs. Medical care for you, security for both of you, education for her, a future that doesn't depend on whether there's $23 in your checking account." Rachel stared at him. "How did you know about the—" "I had my assistant do some research last night. Not to invade your privacy, but to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Your medical bills, the mortgage situation, the overdue utilities." David's voice softened. "Rachel, you're 3 days away from having your power shut off." The truth hung between them like a sword. Rachel had been so focused on hiding their desperation from Sophie that she'd almost convinced herself they could make it another week, another month. "Mr. David," Sophie said suddenly, looking up from her fruit arrangement, "are you an angel?" David's breath caught. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Well," Sophie said seriously, "Mommy always says angels help people when they need it most, and you came right when we needed help with our water and our empty refrigerator. Plus, you have kind eyes like I think angels would have." David knelt down until he was eye level with her. "Sophie, what would you say if I told you I might be able to help your mommy get better and make sure you never have to worry about food or a place to live again?" Sophie's expression grew thoughtful, far too mature for her 7 years. "I would say that sounds too good to be true, but Mommy always tells me to believe in good things. And I would ask what you want in return, because Mommy says nothing good is ever really free." The wisdom of this child continued to astound David. She was right, of course. He did want something in return. He wanted to be her father. He wanted to make up for 8 lost years. He wanted to build something more meaningful than any skyscraper he'd ever constructed. "What I want," David said carefully, "is to be part of your family, to help take care of you and your mommy. Would that be okay with you?" Sophie looked at her mother, then back at David. "Would you stay forever, or would you have to go far away like other people do?" The question pierced him. She was asking about abandonment, about the father she thought had died, about whether David would prove to be another person who disappeared from her life. "I would stay forever," David said solemnly. "I promise." Sophie considered this, then extended her small hand toward him. "Okay, Mr. David. You can be part of our family, but first, can you teach me how to make those pancakes? I want to make breakfast for Mommy." As David took her tiny hand in his, he felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what wealth really meant. Everything he'd built, every success he'd achieved, had led to this moment, standing in a humble kitchen, holding hands with a daughter who didn't yet know she was his, promising to build something infinitely more valuable than money. The real construction project of his life was just beginning. 3 days had passed since David's promise, and the small house on Maple Street had transformed into something resembling controlled chaos. Workers had indeed found legitimate plumbing issues. The pipes were older than disco and twice as problematic, but David's repairs had somehow expanded to include new appliances, fresh paint, and mysterious electrical work that seemed to require an unusual amount of coordination with the main office. Sophie had appointed herself supervisor of all activities, carrying around a small notebook where she carefully recorded important worker information in her 7-year-old handwriting. She developed particularly strong opinions about paint colors and had convinced David that the kitchen needed happiness yellow walls, because yellow makes people smile even when they're tired. Rachel watched this transformation with growing anxiety and wonder. David arrived every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, always with fresh groceries and always with a different carefully crafted excuse for why the repairs were taking so long. Yesterday it had been unexpected foundation issues. Today he'd mentioned something about comprehensive system upgrades that really should be done all at once. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. David Bennett wasn't just fixing their house, he was claiming it, and Sophie was falling completely under his spell. "Mr. David!" Sophie called from the kitchen where she was having her afternoon snack, real crackers with real cheese, a luxury that still amazed her. "Come see what I drew." David appeared from the hallway where he'd been consulting with the electrical team, which Rachel suspected was code for making phone calls about things far beyond home repair. His work clothes had gradually been replaced by more casual attire that still managed to look expensive, and Rachel noticed he'd started keeping a small toolkit in his car, a prop that was becoming less convincing each day. Sophie proudly displayed her latest artwork, a detailed family portrait that made David's breath catch. She'd drawn 3 figures standing in front of a house that looked remarkably like theirs, but better, with fresh paint and flower boxes and a bright yellow door. "This is me," she pointed to the smallest figure. "And this is Mommy feeling better," she indicated a woman who stood tall and smiled wide. "And this is you, Mr. David, staying forever like you promised." The figure she'd drawn for David was holding the hands of both other figures, and above all 3 heads, she'd carefully drawn a large heart with the word family written inside in rainbow letters. "Sophie," Rachel said gently, "sweetheart, you know Mr. David has his own life, his own work. He won't really be able to stay forever." Sophie's expression grew stubborn, an expression David was beginning to recognize as distinctly his own. "But he promised, Mommy, and promises are the most important thing in the whole world." David looked at Rachel over Sophie's head, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Sophie's right," he said quietly. "Promises are the most important thing." That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed clutching her new stuffed animal, a gift David claimed his supervisor had left behind, Rachel finally confronted the situation that was spiraling beyond her control. "David, we need to talk, really talk." They sat on the front porch, the autumn air crisp around them, while the sounds of their sleeping neighborhood created a peaceful backdrop to what Rachel knew would be a life-changing conversation. "The DNA results came back," David said without preamble, pulling an official-looking envelope from his jacket pocket. "Though I haven't needed to open them, I've known since the moment I saw her." Rachel's hands trembled as she took the envelope. "David, before you say anything else, I need you to understand something. Sophie has been my whole world for 7 years. I've made every decision, every sacrifice, every choice with her best interests in mind. I won't let anyone hurt her, not even you, especially not me," David agreed. "Rachel, I need to tell you who I really am. I know who you are. You're David Bennett, and you obviously have more money than you had 8 years ago, and I'm worth $53 million, David said quietly. I own Bennett Construction Empire. I have houses I've never slept in and cars I've never driven. I could buy this entire neighborhood without checking my bank balance. Rachel stared at him, the words not quite computing. 53 million? And none of it means anything compared to what I found here. David's voice was thick with emotion. Rachel, I've been living a half-life, building companies, making deals, accumulating wealth, but never building anything that mattered. Then I walked into this house and met my daughter, our daughter, and suddenly I understood what I've been missing. David, this is... Rachel struggled for words. This is too much, too fast. Sophie doesn't even know who you really are. I want to tell her, not about the money, not yet, but about being her father, about how much I already love her, how much I want to be part of her life. And then what? You sweep in with your millions and take her away from everything she's ever known. Turn her into some rich man's daughter who's too good for her dying mother. David's expression grew fierce. Never. Rachel, you're not going to die. Not on my watch. I've already spoken to Dr. Harrison at Memorial Cancer Center, the best oncologist on the East Coast. She's reviewing your files, and she thinks there are treatment options your current doctors haven't explored. I can't afford... You don't need to afford anything. Sophie needs her mother, and I need... David paused, searching for the right words. I need to know that the woman who raised my daughter, who taught her about kindness and gratitude and love, is going to be okay. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. David, I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about what happens to us? David was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars, beginning to appear in the darkening sky. 8 years ago, I thought success meant building the tallest buildings, making the most money, expanding the furthest. But watching Sophie show me that empty refrigerator like it was full of treasures, seeing her save an old apple for her sick mother, she taught me more about real wealth in 5 minutes than I learned in 20 years of business. He turned to look directly at Rachel. I want to be her father, not just biologically, but really be her father. I want to teach her to ride a bike and help with homework and scare away boys when she's 16. I want to take care of you both, not because I have to, but because you're my family. The family I didn't know I was searching for my entire life. Nay, Rachel opened the DNA test envelope with shaking hands, though they both already knew what it would say. The results confirmed what Sophie's green eyes had already announced. David Bennett was indeed her father. So what happens now? Rachel whispered. David smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived on their doorstep, the expression reached his eyes completely. Now we tell our daughter that her father didn't die after all. He just took a very long time to find his way home. Inside the house, Sophie slept peacefully, dreaming of yellow kitchens and families that stayed together forever, unaware that tomorrow would bring the most wonderful surprise of her young life. The morning sun streamed through the new kitchen windows as Sophie sat at the table, carefully arranging her cereal. David watched her from the doorway, his heart hammering with nervous energy. Today was the day. After 4 days of being Mr. David the Fix-It Man, he was going to tell his daughter the truth. Rachel emerged from her bedroom, moving with slightly more energy than she'd had in weeks. The first consultation with Dr. Harrison had gone better than expected. There were treatment options that offered real hope. "Good morning, beautiful girl," David said, settling into the chair across from Sophie. "Good morning, Mr. David. Today feels like a happy day." Sophie's innocent observation nearly undid his composure. Rachel joined them at the table, her hands trembling as she reached for her coffee. They'd rehearsed this conversation, trying to find words that would explain 8 years of absence. "Sophie, sweetheart," Rachel began gently, "Mr. David and I need to tell you something very important." Sophie's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, her green eyes growing serious. "Are you in trouble?" "No, baby, nothing like that." David leaned forward. "Sophie, remember how you told me about your daddy who went to heaven?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Mommy said he was very brave and loved me very much." David felt his throat close up. "Sophie, your daddy didn't go to heaven. He just didn't know about you. And when he found out, he came looking for you as fast as he could." Sophie's brow furrowed in confusion. "But Mommy said—" "I know what Mommy said, and she was trying to protect you." David's voice grew thick with emotion. "Sophie, I'm your daddy. I'm the one who should have been here all along, and I'm so sorry I wasn't." Sophie stared at David for what felt like an eternity. You're my real daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your real daddy." Sophie looked between David and Rachel. "Does this mean you're not going to leave again?" "Because when people leave, sometimes they don't come back." "Sophie," David said, taking her small hands in his, "I promise you that I will never leave you again. Never. You're stuck with me forever." Sophie studied his face with intense scrutiny. "Do you love me even though you just met me?" "I do, sir. I've loved you since the moment I found out you existed. You're the most amazing little girl in the whole world, and I'm the luckiest daddy alive." Something shifted in Sophie's expression. "If you're my real daddy, does that mean you'll help Mommy feel better?" "Yes, because I'm your daddy, I can make sure Mommy gets the very best doctors." David's voice was firm with promise. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Daddy David, will you love me even if I make mistakes or get scared sometimes?" David felt his composure crumble. "Sophie, I will love you when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're scared, when you're brave. I will love you every single day for the rest of my life, no matter what." Sophie studied his face one more time, then slowly wrapped her arms around his neck. "Okay, Daddy David, I love you too." As David held his daughter for the first time, he understood that every success in his life had been building toward this moment. He was a father. Finally, completely a father. The transformation began immediately. Within hours, David's phone rang with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making things happen. Private medical consultations, legal documents, financial arrangements, everything moved into action with precision. Dr. Harrison arrived that afternoon, bringing equipment and specialists that turned their living room into a temporary medical suite. Sophie watched with fascination, perched on David's lap as they explained each test. "The doctors need to take pictures of Mommy's insides," David explained as the technician set up. "Helpful pictures that will show us exactly how to make her feel better." "Like when I had X-rays when I fell off my bike?" Sophie asked. "Exactly like that, but with better machines and more doctors who specialize in helping mommies get strong again." Rachel submitted to the tests with hope and disbelief. 3 weeks ago, she'd been avoiding medical calls she couldn't afford. Now, the country's leading oncologist was in her living room, while her daughter sat safely in her father's arms. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Harrison said after her assessment, "I have encouraging news. Your original treatment was limited, but there are aggressive therapies we can pursue immediately." "What kind of therapies?" Rachel asked. "Your specific cancer type, adenocarcinoma with PD-L1 expression, responds exceptionally well to the new CAR T-cell immunotherapy we couldn't access through standard insurance channels. Combined with targeted radiation and experimental checkpoint inhibitors, we're seeing remarkable results in cases like yours. The previous doctors simply didn't have access to these cutting-edge treatments." Sophie looked up at David. "Does that mean Mommy might get completely better?" Dr. Harrison smiled warmly. "It means we're going to fight very hard to make sure your Mommy sees you grow up, graduate, get married, and have children of your own." That evening, after the medical team left, David and Rachel sat in their renovated kitchen. "This is happening so fast," Rachel said. "Yesterday I was wondering how to pay for school lunch. Today I have specialists designing treatment that costs more than I made in my entire working life." David reached for her hand. "Rachel, this isn't charity. You're the mother of my child. You raised her to be extraordinary despite impossible circumstances. Taking care of you isn't obligation, it's privilege. The money involved. The money is irrelevant. Sophie needs her mother, and I need to know that the woman who taught my daughter about kindness and gratitude is going to be okay." Rachel squeezed his hand, feeling a weight finally lifting. "She really loves you already. The way she says Daddy David, like she's been waiting her whole life. I've been waiting my whole life to hear it." David smiled, then grew serious. "Rachel, we need to discuss Sophie's future, education, where we'll live." "What do you mean?" "I want to move you both somewhere better, not immediately. Stability first, but eventually closer to the medical center, a house with a yard, good schools." "David, I can't uproot her entire life. I'm talking about expanding her world while keeping what you built." David leaned forward. "Rachel, Sophie is brilliant. She reads at 5th grade level, shows exceptional aptitude, with the right opportunities. You want private school. I want to give her every advantage while ensuring she stays the amazing child you raised. Money opens doors, but it can't create character. You've already given her something more valuable than anything I could buy." Before Rachel could respond, small footsteps approached. Sophie appeared, clutching her stuffed animal. "I had a dream," she said softly. "I dreamed Daddy David was gone, and everything went back to how it was before." David scooped Sophie into his arms. "That was just a dream, sweetheart. I'm here, and I'm staying." Sophie buried her face against his shoulder. "Promise? Because sometimes dreams feel really real." Sophie, when grown-ups make promises to children, those promises become the most important thing in their life, more important than work, more important than money." Sophie looked up with serious eyes. "Even more important than building things?" David smiled. "Especially more important than building things. Because the most important thing I'll ever build is our family, and that's a project that lasts forever." As David held his daughter, while Rachel's hand rested on his arm, he realized everything else had been practice for this moment, learning to be the father Sophie deserved. 3 weeks into their new reality, their lives had settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and natural. Sophie's mornings included helping Daddy David check emails while eating breakfast she no longer rationed. Rachel's days structured around treatments that filled her with hope. David discovered running his empire could be done from a kitchen table if it meant being present for every moment. The first immunotherapy session had gone better than expected. Rachel's energy was improving, and constant pain was fading. Sophie had insisted on accompanying them, armed with mommy comfort supplies, including stuffed animals, cookies, and a drawing of Rachel as a superhero fighting bad sick germs. "The medicine is working, isn't it?" Sophie asked Dr. Harrison during follow-up, her directness catching the oncologist off guard. "It appears to be, yes. Your mommy is responding very well." Sophie nodded seriously. "I knew it would work. Daddy David told me when you love someone enough and give them the best help, good things happen." That afternoon, they had their first official father-daughter outing, a bookstore trip that became an adventure Sophie would remember forever. "Can I really choose any books I want?" Sophie asked as they walked through the children's section. "Any books you want," David confirmed. "I was thinking we should fill that empty bookshelf in your room." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Fill the whole shelf? That's like 100 books." Sophie approached the task with methodical seriousness. She examined each selection carefully, reading summaries aloud and explaining her choices. David watched his daughter's decision-making process with fascination. recognizing traces of his analytical nature mixed with Rachel's intuitive wisdom. "Daddy David," Sophie said as they stood in line, "can I ask you something serious?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Are you rich? Like really, really rich?" David felt his breath catch. They'd been carefully managing Sophie's exposure to his wealth. "What makes you ask that?" "Well, you bought all these books without looking at prices. And yesterday you bought 3 different cereals because I couldn't decide." "Mommy used to always check prices." David knelt to Sophie's level, aware this conversation would shape her relationship with money for years. "Sophie, yes, I have a lot of money, but do you know what I learned from meeting you and Mommy?" Sophie shook her head. "Having money doesn't make you rich. Having people to love makes you rich. Before I met you, I had lots of money but was actually poor because I didn't have family." Sophie considered this gravely. "So now you're rich in money and rich in family?" "Exactly. And that means I can use money to take care of family, which is what money is really for." "Can I tell you a secret?" Sophie whispered. "Always. Sometimes I feel scared about the money. Not scared, but worried. I'll start wanting too many things, or other kids will think I'm different." David felt admiration for his daughter's emotional intelligence. "Sophie, that's very wise to worry about. Can I tell you what I think we should do?" Sophie nodded eagerly. "For every special thing we buy for ourselves, we also do something nice for someone else. That way, money helps us remember to be grateful and kind." Sophie's face lit up. "Like how Mommy shared our food with Mrs. Henderson even when we didn't have much." "Exactly. Your Mommy taught you sharing makes everything better. Now we can share even more." "I like that rule. Can we start today? Maybe buy books for my school library. They have really old ones falling apart." David felt his heart swell. Perfect way to start. That evening, returning home with bags of books for Sophie and her school, they found Rachel preparing dinner with energy she hadn't possessed in months. The sight of his family, healthy, happy, secure, filled David with contentment he'd never imagined. "How was your book adventure?" Rachel asked, accepting Sophie's enthusiastic hug. "We bought so many books, and Daddy David said we can make a rule about sharing good things, and I chose books for my whole class." As Sophie recounted their afternoon, David watched Rachel's face glow with happiness and health. The experimental treatment was working beyond their hopes, bringing visible improvements daily. "David," Rachel said quietly while Sophie arranged her books, "Dr. Harrison called with latest test results." David felt his pulse quicken. "And?" Rachel's smile was radiant. "The tumors are shrinking significantly. She says if this continues, I could be in full remission within 6 months." David pulled both Rachel and Sophie into fierce embrace, feeling tears of gratitude. 6 months ago, he'd been successful but lonely. Now he was father to an extraordinary daughter and partner to a woman whose strength humbled him. "Does this mean Mommy will be completely better?" Sophie asked, looking between her parents with cautious hope. "It means," David said, voice thick with emotion, "we're going to have many, many years together as a family, all of us healthy and happy." Sophie nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Then we should definitely read all these books together, because families that read together stay together forever, right?" As they settled for evening story time, David reflected on the journey bringing them here. Every building constructed, every deal negotiated, every success achieved had led to this: holding his daughter while she read to her recovering mother, surrounded by quiet contentment of a family finally complete. The greatest construction project of his life was no longer in blueprints. It was here, built on foundations of love that would last forever. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Sophie was at school and Rachel was at her weekly treatment appointment. David had been working from their kitchen table, laptop open to quarterly reports that seemed increasingly meaningless compared to the artwork Sophie had taped to the refrigerator, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Bennett, this is Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you regarding Sophie Martinez. David's blood turned to ice. What about Sophie? Sir, we've received a complaint from a neighbor alleging that a child is being inappropriately influenced by an unrelated adult with questionable motives. The complainant reported seeing expensive cars, construction crews, and significant property improvements, suggesting possible grooming or exploitation of a vulnerable family. The words hit David like a physical blow. Exploitation. Who would say such a thing? I can't reveal the source of the complaint, Mr. Bennett, but I can tell you that someone has expressed concern about a wealthy man suddenly appearing in a child's life and lavishing expensive gifts on her family. There are questions about your relationship to the child and whether proper legal procedures have been followed. David's mind raced, and he'd been so focused on taking care of his family that he'd neglected the legal formalities that would protect them. In his eagerness to provide for Sophie and Rachel, he'd perhaps moved too quickly, attracted the wrong kind of attention. Ms. Morrison, Sophie is my daughter. We have DNA confirmation, and I've been providing support for her and her mother. Sir, our records show no legal recognition of paternity. Sophie Martinez's birth certificate lists father as unknown. There are no custody agreements, no formal adoption procedures. From our perspective, you're an unrelated adult who has been spending significant amounts of money on a vulnerable family. The irony was devastating. His love for Sophie, his desire to give her everything she'd been denied, had potentially put her at risk. What happens now? We need to conduct a formal investigation. This includes interviews with the child, her mother, and you. We'll also need to assess the living situation and determine whether the child's best interests are being served. David felt panic rising in his chest. Are you suggesting Sophie would be removed from her home? Mr. Bennett, if we determine that a child is in a potentially exploitative situation, we're required to take protective action. I suggest you contact a family attorney immediately. After the call ended, David sat in stunned silence. The happiness they'd built over the past month suddenly felt fragile, threatened by bureaucracy and suspicion. The money that had been their salvation might now be seen as evidence of improper motives. When Rachel returned from her appointment, glowing with news of continued improvement, David had to destroy her joy with the devastating update. Child Protective Services? Rachel's face went pale. David, they could take her away from us. They could take her away from you, David corrected grimly. I have no legal standing as her father. We never formalized anything because we were so focused on your treatment and getting our family stabilized. Rachel sank into a chair, the weight of this new crisis overwhelming her already fragile system. Who would report us? Who would want to hurt Sophie like this? I don't know. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is protecting our family legally before CPS makes any decisions. That afternoon, David's attorney, Margaret Walsh, arrived with a briefcase full of legal documents and a grim expression that didn't inspire confidence. David, I'll be direct with you. The situation is complicated. While the DNA test confirms paternity, you have no legal parental rights. Sophie's mother has sole custody, and from a legal standpoint, you're essentially a stranger, providing financial support. But I'm her father, David said desperately. Biologically, yes. Legally, no. And unfortunately, sudden wealth can raise red flags about potential manipulation or coercion. Margaret spread papers across the table. We need to file for formal paternity recognition immediately. But that process takes time. Meanwhile, CPS can act quickly if they perceive a threat. What kind of threat? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The concern would be that a wealthy individual is using financial incentives to gain inappropriate access to a child. The expensive gifts, the medical treatments, the home renovations, all of that could be interpreted as grooming behavior. David felt sick. Every gesture of love and support could be twisted into something sinister by people who didn't understand their situation. "What do we do?" he asked. "We prepare for the investigation and hope that the truth speaks for itself." "But David, you need to understand. If CPS recommends removal, Sophie could be placed in foster care while the legal issues are resolved. That process could take months." The idea of Sophie being torn away from the only family she'd ever known, placed with strangers while lawyers argued over paperwork, was unthinkable. When Sophie came home from school that afternoon, her usual cheerful chatter about her day felt precious and heartbreaking. She had no idea that their carefully constructed world was under threat, that forces beyond their control might soon separate them. "Daddy David, can we work on my science project tonight?" she asked, settling into his lap with complete trust. "I want to make a volcano that shows how families are like rocks. They get stronger under pressure." The innocent metaphor nearly undid David's composure. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make the best volcano your school has ever seen." That night, after Sophie was asleep, David and Rachel sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their transformed life. Sophie's artwork, medical reports showing Rachel's remarkable recovery, photos of their small family learning to be happy together. "David," Rachel said quietly, "if they try to take her, they won't." "I won't let them." David's voice was fierce with determination. "I've lost 8 years with my daughter. I'm not losing one more day." "But if the legal process takes months, if there's any chance they could place her in foster care?" David turned to face Rachel, and she saw something steel-hard in his expression. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, Sophie stays with her family." Outside, the autumn wind rattled their windows like a warning. The happiness they'd built was about to face its greatest test, and only time would tell if love and determination could overcome the cold machinery of bureaucratic suspicion. The fight for their family was just beginning. The CPS investigation began with a knock on their door at 8 a.m. sharp, just as Sophie was finishing her breakfast and preparing for school. David watched through the window as Janet Morrison approached with a clipboard and a stern expression that made his stomach clench with dread. "Sophie, sweetheart," Rachel said gently, "why don't you go brush your teeth while Mommy and Daddy David talk to this nice lady?" Sophie looked between the adults, her perceptive 7-year-old mind picking up on the tension immediately. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. Just some grown-up business that won't take long." After Sophie disappeared down the hallway, David opened the door to face the woman who held their family's fate in her hands. "Ms. Morrison, please come in." Janet Morrison was a thin woman in her 50s with kind eyes that nonetheless missed nothing as she surveyed their renovated home. David could see her taking mental notes. The expensive appliances, the fresh paint, the obvious signs of sudden wealth. "Mr. Bennett, Ms. Martinez, I want to assure you that our only concern is Sophie's welfare. I'll need to speak with her privately, assess her living conditions, and understand the nature of your relationship." What followed was the most excruciating hour of David's life. He watched helplessly as the social worker questioned Sophie with gentle but persistent inquiries designed to uncover any signs of inappropriate behavior or coercion. "Sophie, has anyone ever asked you to keep secrets from your mommy?" Ms. Morrison asked. "Only surprise secrets, like when Daddy David and I planned Mommy's birthday breakfast," Sophie replied innocently. "Has anyone ever given you gifts and asked for something back?" Sophie looked confused. "You mean like trading?" "No, that would be silly. Daddy David gives me things because he loves me, not because he wants something back. Sophie, do you feel safe with Mr. David? Of course. Sophie's response was immediate and genuine. He's my daddy. He takes care of me and Mommy and makes sure we have everything we need. David felt a glimmer of hope at Sophie's unwavering confidence, but he knew the investigation went deeper than a child's testimony. After Sophie left for school, Ms. Morrison continued her assessment with David and Rachel. Ms. Martinez, some people might say it's convenient that a wealthy man appeared in your life just when you needed financial help the most. Rachel's response was steady and dignified. Ms. Morrison, I understand why this might look suspicious from the outside, but David is Sophie's biological father. He didn't appear randomly. I contacted him when I realized I might not survive to raise our daughter alone. Why didn't you contact him sooner? Pride, fear, the same reasons many young women make difficult choices. Rachel's voice grew stronger, but David has proven himself to be exactly the father Sophie deserves. She's never been happier or more secure. Ms. Morrison turned to David. Mr. Bennett, your financial resources are substantial. Some might argue that you're using your wealth to buy a family. David felt anger flare, but kept his voice controlled. Ms. Morrison, I'd give up every penny I have to keep my daughter safe and happy. The money is just a tool. What matters is the love we've built as a family. Love that developed very quickly. Love that existed the moment I saw her, David corrected. The DNA test confirmed what my heart already knew. Sophie is my daughter, and I would do anything to protect her. The interview continued for another hour, with Ms. Morrison probing every aspect of their relationship and living situation. Finally, she closed her notebook and stood to leave. I'll be submitting my initial report to the review board, she said. We should have a decision within the week. What kind of decision? Rachel asked, her voice tight with fear. Whether to recommend continued investigation, removal pending legal resolution, or case closure. Ms. Morrison's expression softened slightly. I will say this. Sophie appears happy, healthy, and genuinely attached to both of you. That weighs heavily in your favor. After she left, David and Rachel sat in stunned silence, the weight of uncertainty crushing their recent happiness. David, Rachel said quietly, what if they recommend removal? Then we fight. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we fight. That evening brought unexpected reinforcement. David's phone rang with a call from Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Peterson. Mr. Bennett, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I heard about the CPS investigation, and I wanted you to know that several of us at the school have written letters of support. Letters of support. Sophie has been transformed since you came into her life. She's more confident, more engaged, more eager to learn. We've watched her go from a worried little girl trying to take care of her sick mother to a child who feels secure enough to just be 7 years old. David felt tears sting his eyes. Mrs. Peterson, I can't tell you what that means to us. More importantly, Mr. Bennett, Sophie talks about you constantly. The way her face lights up when she mentions Daddy David, that's not something that can be faked or bought. That child loves you with her whole heart. Over the next 3 days, support came from unexpected sources. Their neighbors submitted statements about the positive changes they'd witnessed. Dr. Harrison provided medical documentation showing how David's involvement had directly contributed to Rachel's remarkable recovery. Even the grocery store clerk wrote a letter describing Sophie's excitement about shopping for real food with her daddy. The community that had watched Sophie struggle was now rallying to protect the happiness she'd found. Ironically, it was revealed that the original complaint had come from Mr. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who'd misinterpreted the sudden improvements and expensive cars as signs of drug activity or worse, not knowing the beautiful family story unfolding behind closed doors. On Friday afternoon, Ms. Morrison returned with her final report. David and Rachel sat side by side on their couch, holding hands as they awaited the verdict that would determine their family's future. "After thorough investigation," Ms. Morrison began, "I'm recommending case closure with no further action required." David felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Sophie is clearly thriving in her current environment. The concerns raised in the initial complaint appear to be unfounded. While the circumstances of your family formation are unusual, the child's welfare is obviously being served. "What does this mean for us going forward?" Rachel asked. "It means you're free to proceed with formal paternity recognition and custody arrangements without CPS oversight. Your family is safe." That evening, when Sophie came home from school to find her parents celebrating with tears of joy, she didn't need details to understand that something wonderful had happened. "Are we going to be together forever now?" she asked, wrapping her arms around both David and Rachel. "Forever and always," David promised, holding his family close. "No one and nothing will ever separate us again." The storm had passed, and their foundation had proven unshakable. Now they could finally build the future they'd dreamed of, legally, safely, and completely together. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their new home. Not a mansion, but a comfortable house with a yard where Sophie could play and Rachel could garden as her strength continued to return. The walls were covered with Sophie's artwork, family photos, and Rachel's latest medical reports showing clear scans and complete remission. David sat at the breakfast table, watching his daughter carefully pack her lunch while humming a song she'd learned at her new school. Sophie had adapted beautifully to their changed circumstances, making friends easily and maintaining the generous spirit that had first captured his heart. "Daddy David," Sophie said, settling into her chair with a serious expression that meant important thoughts were coming. "Can I ask you something really important?" "Always, sweetheart." "Do you remember when I showed you our empty refrigerator, and you looked so sad?" David's breath caught. Of course he remembered. That moment had changed everything for all of them. "I remember." "Well, I was thinking about that yesterday when we were donating food to the shelter, and I realized something really amazing." "What's that?" Sophie's green eyes sparkled with the wisdom that continued to amaze him. "I used to think our empty refrigerator meant we didn't have enough, but now I know it meant we had exactly what we needed for you to find us." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "How do you figure that?" "Because if our refrigerator had been full, you would have fixed our pipes and left, and we never would have known you were my real daddy. But because it was empty, you saw how much we needed you, and you saw how much love we had even when we didn't have food." Rachel appeared in the doorway, having overheard their conversation. Her hair had grown back during treatment, and color had returned to her cheeks. She was beautiful and healthy and whole, exactly as David had dreamed during those terrifying weeks of uncertainty. "Sophie's right," Rachel said, joining them at the table. "That empty refrigerator was the beginning of everything good that happened to us." Sophie nodded emphatically. "And now our refrigerator is always full, but not just with food. It's full of love and family and people who take care of each other." David pulled Sophie onto his lap, marveling at how perfectly she fit there, how natural it felt to be her father. "Sophie, you know what you just taught me." "What?" "That sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems. I thought I was successful before I met you and Mommy, but I was actually missing the most important thing in the world." "What was that?" "A family to love, people who matter more than anything else, a reason to come home every day." Sophie studied his face with the intensity she brought to all serious matters. "Daddy David, are you happy we're your family?" "Sophie, you and Mommy are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every single day I wake up grateful that I found you. Even though it took you a really long time to find us." David laughed, the sound rich with contentment, especially because it took me a long time. Sometimes the best things are worth waiting for, even when you don't know you're waiting. Rachel reached across the table to take David's hand. David, there's something I want to tell you. Something I should have said months ago. What's that? Thank you. Not just for the money or the medical care or the security. Thank you for loving Sophie exactly as she is. Thank you for never trying to change her or make her into someone different. Thank you for seeing that what I gave her was valuable, even when I couldn't give her material things. David brought Rachel's hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Rachel, you gave her everything that matters. You gave her kindness, empathy, gratitude, and the ability to find joy in simple things. I just provided the extras. The important extras, Sophie chimed in. Like making sure Mommy got better and we never have to worry about money for food or medicine. Speaking of which, David said, reaching into his briefcase for an official-looking envelope, I have something special to show you both. Sophie bounced with excitement. What is it? These are the final adoption papers. As of today, I'm officially and legally Sophie Martinez Bennett's father. Sophie's eyes went wide. Martinez Bennett? I get both names? You get both names because you have both parents, and we both love you more than words can say. Rachel felt tears stream down her face as she watched Sophie process this information. Their daughter had been through so much uncertainty, so much change, and now she finally had the legal security that matched the emotional reality they'd built. Does this mean nobody can ever take me away from you and Mommy? Nobody, David said firmly. We're a real family now in every way that matters. Sophie threw her arms around David's neck, then reached for Rachel, pulling them all into a group hug that felt like coming home. I love our family, Sophie announced. I love how we take care of each other and share good things and never give up on each other. Just like Charlotte and Wilbur, Rachel said, remembering Sophie's favorite book. Exactly like Charlotte and Wilbur, Sophie agreed, except we all get to stay together forever. As they sat around their breakfast table, the table where Sophie had once rationed cereal, where David had first pretended to be a repairman, where they'd weathered investigations and medical scares and the beautiful chaos of becoming a family, David reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd built skyscrapers and shopping centers, created a business empire worth millions, achieved every measure of success his younger self had dreamed of. But none of it compared to this, a 7-year-old girl who taught him that real wealth measured in love, not money. A woman who'd shown him that strength came from sacrifice, not power. A family that had formed not because it was easy, but because it was right. The empty refrigerator that had broken his heart had actually been full all along, full of everything they needed to build something beautiful together. Daddy David, Sophie said as they prepared to start their day, do you think other people have empty refrigerators that need to be filled with love? I'm sure they do, sweetheart. Then maybe we should help them too, because now that we know how good it feels to have a full family, we should share that feeling with other people who need it. David smiled, recognizing his daughter's generous heart in action once again. I think that's a wonderful idea, Sophie. What did you have in mind? Well, Sophie said thoughtfully, you know how to fix things and build things, and Mommy knows how to take care of people, and I know how to make people smile. Maybe we could fix empty refrigerators for other families who need help. And so began the next chapter of their story, not just as a family who had found each other, but as a family dedicated to helping others discover their own abundance. The Bennett Family Foundation would eventually help hundreds of families, but it all started with a 7-year-old girl who understood that love multiplied when shared. Years later, when Sophie graduated from college, when she married the boy next door who'd fallen in love with her generous spirit, when she had children of her own who called David Grandpa and Rachel Grandma, They would all remember the morning that changed everything. The morning when a little girl opened an empty refrigerator and showed a lonely millionaire what real wealth looked like. The morning their family began.